Well, that's right. Welcome, everyone. It's 6 o'clock, and I love meetings that start on time. If there's a volunteer to lead the pledge, you'd be welcome to do so. Jim, please. Flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, welcome, everyone. I see most of the same people here tonight, and I appreciate the interest in the budget. It's a really important document, so thank you for finding the time to participate. We are ready, set, go with the same presentation we did the last line. Is there anyone here that would like to see that again? I'm inclined to do it again. All right, so we're going to do it, and welcome our assistant director, Stephanie, and she can go through the PowerPoint presentations, and then we'll turn to questions and conversation. So Stephanie, welcome.
Okay. Good evening. I'm the Assistant Finance Director. So I'm just going to start by going over an overview of assumptions that were used to develop the budget, then move on to a macro view of all funds, then move on to the general fund, a brief review of the capital improvement program, and then the next steps in the budget process. And then we're actually going to go straight into the recovery funds before we take questions, because Mark is going to walk around with the mic at that point. So as you all know, a national pandemic was issued last March, and there was anticipated to be a major loss in sales tax revenue. However, it didn't end up being as bad as predicted due to online sales, but the city did experience a large loss of city businesses and employment with the closure of restaurants in the mall. Many people lost their jobs, and there was talk about a potential second wave. We continue to see rising cost across all services that we provide to citizens. Staff used a conservative approach in preparing the budget. However, even with that, there's a structural deficit of $2.3 million. We'll talk about that later on and get into the overtime issue, but I do want to point out that this budget was developed without the West Covina Sportsplex and Health Department. We'll get direction on those at a later date from council, and budget amendments will be made. This budget was a rollover budget, meaning last year's budget was simply rolled over to this year's, unless there were specific situations in which staff knew we were going to increase or decrease due to contractual obligations or CPI increases. Staff continued to identify general fund expenditures that would be taken to special funds so we can maximize the use of all the funds available and eliminate the expenses from the general fund. Additionally, over the last 2 years, staff has been evaluating ongoing contracts as they come due to determine if we go out for a bid or try to get lower prices. Lastly, we anticipate salary savings through attrition in the police department. We're going to start with all funds, as previously stated. There is $145.7 million in revenue across all funds, with the general fund being the majority of that at 47%. On the expenditure side, there is $159.6 million in expenditures across all funds, with the general fund accounting for 42%. The reason there is a large difference in the special revenues versus expenditures is generally that we accumulate funding in the special revenues over time to do specific projects, and then we do a project and expend a lot all at once. So that's why you see a difference in that. This slide shows the expenditure of different categories across all funds. You can see salaries and benefits and maintenance and operations are both 29%, followed by capital projects and equipment purchases at 27%, and debt service is 15%. Moving on to the general fund. On this chart, revenues are in blue and expenditures are in red. Over these 7 years of data, you can see that there was a lot over the years, and expenditures were quite higher than revenues. Those were the years the city was spending down the reserves. For fiscal year 2021-2022, $2.3 million of reserves is being proposed to be used and revenue in order to balance against expenditures. While this is not ideal and it's realistic expectation for council that the city should expect less revenue due to last year and is still recovering from the economic impacts of the pandemic. Total revenue is $67.8 million, with property tax accounting for 42%, followed by sales tax at 23% and other taxes at 12%. Combined taxes account for 66% of the total general fund revenue. At the bottom of the pie chart, you can see that 3% that I previously mentioned for fund balance. Again, this is not ideal, but in order to balance the budget, it was necessary. Expenditures this year only increased 1.7% in general fund revenue. However, the lost revenue was greater. Sales tax was down $1 million. Transient hotel motel tax was only $600,000. Additionally, the false alarm program was eliminated, which was about $100,000. And contractor license fees was also eliminated, which is about $300,000. This slide shows property tax from 2009. As you can see, it's a very stable revenue source for the city and continues to go up. It has not increased by a lot every year, but it goes up a little. For 2022, staff is estimating it to go up about $100,000 from $28.1 million to $28.2 million. Next is the same history for sales tax revenue. It has been a little bit more fluctuating over the past few years, but it's still a fairly stable revenue source that continues to increase overall over time. On this slide, the two largest revenue sources, property tax and sales tax, have been combined and shown against police and fire expenditures. As you can see, in the first 5 years, our expenditures for public safety grew a lot higher than the two revenue sources. However, in the last 2 years, you can see that we've leveled it out a little bit. This is from staff cutting costs and streamlining efficiencies without sacrificing services that we get from public safety. Out of the $67.8 million in general fund expenditures, police and fire account for 60% combined. This slide shows that expenses in the general fund are labor extensive. That services that we provide through the salaries and benefits make up 61%, and maintenance and operations is only 39%. These tables show fiscal year 1920 in order to compare actual totals for each year. Overtime for police was about $2.9 million last fiscal year and $2.6 million for fire. And we anticipate that both of them are over that for this fiscal year once we ended. Included with the preliminary budget was a report regarding fire department services, and staff has continued to look at alternative services as an issue that will need to be addressed in this coming year for the fire department and its overtime. Overall, the general fund balance is projected to be $21.4 million by June 30th, 2021. $3.5 million of that is non-spendable, which includes loans that are due to the successor agency and land held for resale. After taking those into account, unassigned fund balance is projected to be $17.8 million, which is 20% of operating expenditures, which is 9% over the fund balance policy adopted by council, which is 17%. We are now fully staffed and focusing on a lot of cleanup that needs to be done, so these numbers could change as staff continues to clean up issues from the prior years. Here's a historical look at the city's general fund balance over the past 15 years. As you can see, in the early years, the fund balance was being spent down, and then it took a nosedive in fiscal year 13-14. Those were the years of the dissolution of redevelopment. In fiscal year 2015, the city started receiving redevelopment payments back, and the fund balance began rising again. After that, it started to dip again, but it has been coming back up for the last few years. Now moving on to the CIP. The city is on track to invest $6.6 million in capital expenditures this fiscal year. Expenditures are projected to jump to $38.7 million in fiscal year 21-22, mainly from the $20 million in federal recovery funds, which we'll touch base later on in this presentation. Here's a graphical depiction of these numbers for fiscal year 21-22. As you can see, the majority will be in recovering funds, followed by streets and sidewalks, and then parks. The next steps is the budget will go back to council for consideration of adoption on June 15th. Following that, staff will continue to monitor the revenues and expenditures timely. This will include bringing quarterly reports as necessary, as we have in the past, and adjustments to the budget. We are also starting to shift from reactive to preventive maintenance by addressing building and infrastructure issues. We will continue to adhere to our adopted policies and work to plan to resolve the general fund structural deficit and maintain general fund reserves for the city. Lastly, we'll continue to work with our 9 different unions through interest-based collective bargaining. I would also note that a summary of these will also be in the presentation that's given to council on the June 15th, meaning the summary of the feedback we get from the public. Moving on to the recovery funds. The city is going to receive $19.5 million in recovery funds through the American Recovery Act. And these funds, 50% were received in May, and then we're expected to receive the other 50% next May. We have until December 31st, 2024 to obligate all of those funds, and then December 2026 to actually spend all of them. The recovery funds are intended to support public health expenditures, address negative economic impacts, replace lost public sector revenue, which can be used for government services, provide premium pay for essential workers, invest in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructures. And within those categories can be somewhat broad for some of them. Some of the funding restrictions that you are not allowed to use the funding for is they cannot pay interest on principal or outstanding debt. They cannot replenish any rainy day funds or other reserve funds. They cannot be used to pay settlements or judgments. They cannot be deposited into a pension fund, and they cannot be used to match non-federal grants. This is the first category the city is proposing to spend its funding on, which is $9 million for public health related expenditures. And this includes EKGs for the fire department, police and fire communication equipment in the form of radios and other equipment necessary for that. Fire station repairs, as they were used as vaccine point of distribution response facilities. And then there is about $98,000 going to the professional service agreement for the health department. Overall, again, it's $9 million towards public health expenses. The city is also proposing to use $1 million for job training and creation in partnership with a community-based organization. And then for the last 9.5 million, the city is anticipating to get this from its lost revenue, which is a broader category of use. We still have to use all the funding, but as long as it falls under a government service or a need for the government, we can essentially use it under this category. And so the city is looking at doing a lot of one-time items to address a lot of needs. The first being IT infrastructure for the city in the form of our microwave system that is no longer supported, a new electronic financial accounting software system so we can be more transparent and efficient, park, pathway, and sports field lighting, an ADA transition plan, removal of communication tower that we're no longer really using but paying monthly for, and then public safety equipment, which contains SCBAs, pumper trucks, 2 of them, and then a ladder quint truck. Again, overall, this will be $9.5 million to get us to the total overall of the $19 million. With that, I'll take any questions.
All right, at this time, I'm going to be coming around with the mic. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand.
As Mark comes out, I would recommend we just follow the same procedure we did the last time. I thought the dialogue was constructive, but if we could just take turns and be respectful of each other, that would be much appreciated.
All right. Would anyone like to speak?
That's the problem with all of you. Jim Gurvich. Last time we had a discussion about whether the budget's balanced or not, and I appreciate the change in language, so we weren't saying it was a balanced budget. I appreciate that part. However, I think even using the words that were used in the presentation to say that we use the reserves to balance the budget, I think is inappropriate. And the reason why I'm focused so much on this particular subject is because the state auditors made a really big deal of the city's continuous practice of deficit spending more money than you take in revenue. This budget actually is planning to do that. The number was $2.7 million deficit. I think that is a serious issue. And something that I wasn't prepared to talk about last week that I want to mention, it's actually against the City Council's policy. And therefore, I think it's inappropriate for management to present a deficit spending budget. And I'm going to quote from the budget policy as adopted by the City Council. This is page 8 off of the budget policy. It says, the city defines its balanced operating budget as uses of resources for operating purposes does not exceed the available resources over the budget period. And then it defines what resources are. Resources are revenues. And then uses are expenditures. Essentially, the policy is that you cannot plan to expend more than you take in. That I'm using the simple English. And for that to happen, I think would require the city council to deliberately adopt a suspension of their own budget policy. And I think that would be very unfortunate because that flies in the face of the audit report that the city received from the state, which said the reason why you're in bad trouble financially is because the city has had a practice of spending more than it takes in. And so it's not just me talking like this isn't a good idea. You have officials at the highest levels saying the same thing. And I think it is really necessary that the city do something to change the structure of it. And I made a suggestion at the last meeting about something that could change the structure of it. And the finance director got really angry with me for making the suggestion. But I'm going to make it again. Because it's not that hard. It appears that in the budget document that was presented, that the city has chosen to under-budget property tax revenue. And a relatively easy way to balance a budget is increasing your revenue projections. I've once again examined property tax and its revenue over the last several years, and for whatever reason, the city has consistently under-budgeted property tax revenue. The receipts have always been significantly higher, at least $1 million higher. And I think that's the case this year, too. That makes the problem half of what it was in terms of changes that could be made to bring it closer into balance. And I'm not sure why there was so much anger about this particular suggestion the last time, but I'm repeating myself because I think it's an easy one. The other ones, I didn't see any other revenue choices. The other choices are expenditures, and I've already talked about expenditures in other forums. I outlined them in some depth about the fire department, and I understand the city is working on trying to do something about the fire department, but I think it is totally unacceptable for the city to accept that every single year the fire department overdrafts its overtime budget by at least $1 million and has never done anything to change that. And that's happened all 6 years that I've been involved with this process. So that's, and I don't think I need to repeat all the specific suggestions that I've said before on how that could be accomplished, but I think that is something that really has to happen. That's it. That's my little speech.
Is there anyone else?
I'm going to surprise you. Yeah, I know. Thank you for using and putting in interest-based bargaining that I remember mentioning the last time, and changing a slide on the, the slide. Thank you. And last time I remarked that I kind of agreed with your approach dealing with the city stuff. I still kind of agree. But if there's any way, and it sort of flies contrary a bit, I agree with what Jim said about that completely. I would tweak the projection based on data, not just grabbing it out of the sky. I think it is realistic. With the price of housing and my 7,000 and some property taxes. Okay. Anyway, and fees. But residents that I hear from are bothered that this federal money isn't being used to help business. So I do think it would be prudent for the city to come up with some way of helping business, no interest-free loans or something. There's a magic hat for you to find something. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Steve Bennett, resident. I was going to comment on what Jim said. I have a different opinion on why they don't like to raise the property tax revenue. Is that gives them the ability to do budget amendments later for things that they didn't plan for. So I think it's personally a different scenario. I think they're trying to be able to have that money to use later and to say, oh, we got more. So that's my personal opinion on why that's there, because they're famous for doing budget amendments for everything under the sun. I agree on what Jerry said. Thank you for making a few grammatical things to where it's more reasonably explained. I saw a few on there, so thank you for taking that. I'm more than willing to give thanks where they're due, so thank you. Can we go back to the CIP page by chance? That'll probably work.
Or did you mean in the federal?
It could be either one. I don't know where it'll fall into, so maybe I'll let you decide that because I don't know where that answer may be. I know as a former youth sports volunteer and someone who was a president of a Little League, one of the things that happens at Little Leagues is the foul ball netting gets deteriorated. And there are many fields that have had their foul ball netting up for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. The field that I was at, I don't think has had it replaced, and I was president over 10 years ago. So, and they don't even have one net on one side where foul balls can go into people's. So I know we're doing lighting. I'm assuming it's LED or energy efficient. I'm assuming that's the plan as it needs to be. But I'm thinking that in one of these two pots, whether it be the federal or the state's or the city's normal CIP program, I think we need to find a way to do that because we have time right now to get some of that stuff done. And that's expensive bills. So I think that's some things I'd like to see done from a youth sports perspective. And I think we need to look at all of our fields that way, just as something to think about. As for the lighting, like I said, energy efficient, I'm fine with. For the most part, I think that's all I have right now that really stuck out. I agree with what they said. I'm really curious how the city's going to handle the continued fire time overtime or fire department overtime. It's an ongoing issue. It's an epidemic in itself, and I think that needs to be corrected. I understand that there's times that they have to. I get it. I totally get it. It's not a job that works a 9 to 5. I know. I understand. But there has to be better scheduling, and after this many years, they can't say they don't have the experience to know. They claim they're experts on wanting to go to county before, and they're not experts on managing their overtime. So it seems like it's pick and choose. So I still think that's a major problem. And like I said, with Jim on the on the budget from a revenue perspective, I think some of those revenues are being hidden so that they can be used later for things that aren't in the budget. That's my personal opinion. I've seen that happen a lot with this council, with the previous council, where things come up and it's like, oh, we ended up getting more money than we thought in this, so we can use it here, and that no longer means we're budgeting properly. So if we're going to do this, we got to do it right, and we got to have a blueprint for where the city works, because we can't continue to have the city be, dropping in numbers in the state's worst cities. That's not a number one I want to be. And so these are things that they have spotted that are things that we have problems with. Long range planning, any normal large company does short range planning and long range planning, and they review it every year, 5 and 10 years out. And I don't know why we're not doing things like that as well. So I've been a part of several long range planning meetings over the years, and with private sector stuff. So I know they do it, and I just can't imagine we don't. So that's what I have for now. I'm going to let some other people here speak. I'm sure there's a few more, but maybe I'll talk again in a minute. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Dave Stewart here. I was a few minutes late getting here, but I saw probably the last 3 quarters. A couple questions. I was really interested in the 19 million influx that's coming in. I noticed it's all got a number beside the things that are going to happen. But if the thing should change, are you allowed to change what you have on that list? And my understanding is it all has to be completed by the end of 2023. It has to be used by 2023 at the end.
So we have until 2024 to actually formalize our list and say this is what we're going to spend all that money on and obligate it.
Right.
And then we have until 2026 to actually use all the cash.
Okay, thank you. One thing I thought about is I noticed next week coming up in the city council, and we got 8 miles of sewers in the city that need work on at the tune of $14 million. And my understanding is we never had a slush fund for that purpose that I can think of. So is there some way of putting it on this list here and substituting something else? I mean, I see 3 fire trucks on there and $1 million for education, whatever it said. But, I mean, we got some things that are important that are in the past. And I'll tell you the truth, the other day I looked at the, used to be Big League Dreams. Now it's the West Covina Sports Plaza, I guess. It is one mess down there. We need money to help that. And it's unfortunate we got it back in that condition. But if you can make changes, that would probably might be considered, and see how that works out going forward. Thank you.
Anyone else would like to speak?
I guess last night's planning commission probably had a little bit of that long-term budgeting that Steve alluded to, because there was a laundry list of a wish list is what it was being identified as. And I just had a couple of questions regarding some of those items. One identified use of the general fund as a means of funding the objective. And the other was a surveillance system citywide that was rather controversial because 2 of the planning commissioners couldn't decide whether it was the police proposal that was approved by city council already, or it was something different. But in any case, there are money allocated to this wish list. Is that money being reflective in this report, this presentation tonight?
Yes. So the capital improvement program that came to the Planning Commission was an excerpt out of the preliminary budget. And so that's this table here. Does that answer your question?
Where does that show the surveillance as well as the
And so, let me see if I can share it, because I'm trying to get to exactly what you're referring to, and I have the preliminary budget up, but I don't have it up on that screen.
JD, the question of the cameras was addressed at council meeting 3 or 4 meetings ago, and the intention at that time and the direction was that we would use, for the startup of that system, for the first couple of years, we'd use asset forfeiture money. So there's no general fund money in that as it's now constituted, nor does the capital budget have general fund money in it. If I were to identify a shortcoming in this budget, the city's budget generally, we're way underfunded and we're not including the capital needs of the city out of the general fund. The dream city, you'd spend a third operating, a third maintenance, can you imagine, and a third capital. But here, we spend all of our general fund money on operating, and the capital money is out of the general fund virtually non-existent.
Okay, maybe I miscommunicated. It wasn't the general fund money was going to be used for the surveillance system. There was another item on that wish list that I believe Commissioner Nick Lewis identified as, and he read verbatim that it referred to general funds usage for that particular project, which obviously is a wish list, but it's a wish list that actually goes out to, I believe, 2024, 25. Although most of those years there are no money identified on any of these projects.
Right.
Not sure why it was shown that way, but for this coming new fiscal year, the monies that were shown, apparently one of them identified general fund usage.
I'm happy to look at that.
I had pulled up the capital improvement program up on the screen now. Trying to make it. Which category was that off of? I figured it was either under building or, do you recall?
Fortunately, they didn't give out handouts, and I don't think they categorized it. It was just kind of like.
Because this was, I did see the packet, and it was just an excerpt out of our budget. Because that's building, and then under general chambers, self-contained be portable radios, software, but everything here is either PEG or Senate Bill 2 or other. LRB would not be long range. So I'm not sure. We'd have to look into. I don't see it. It's not sticking out at me right here. Y'all can see it.
Were the cameras for parks or other stuff? Do you remember, Mr. Mayor?
Wanted them everywhere.
So like citywide surveillance cameras, basically?
Is it the Citywide Enterprise Resource Planning software system?
Say that again, please.
The Citywide Enterprise Resource Planning software system for $2 million?
No.
Let's just hold this thought. I'll owe you that answer. Jerry?
So are they talking about putting cameras throughout the city? Because when that's come up in the past, it has not been something residents wanted.
Some conversation last night at the Planning Commission, but it hasn't been in front of the council at all yet.
I hope it.
I understand.
Thank you.
So you are confirming that what was proposed last night is not the same as what was approved by City Council previously? Is that correct?
But JD, I'm going to owe you a response on this question. I wasn't at the meeting last night, and I heard about it from one of my staff that was there, but I'm going to owe you the answer to your question tonight. I don't want to answer.
The one that, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry. The one that was approved was the FOG, is that what they call it? Where it identifies license plates and Flock. Thank you.
Flock is the camera system that the police department brought forward 3 or 4 meetings ago.
Correct.
Using asset forfeiture money, but it wasn't general fund money. There was an acknowledgement at the meeting that that was only a limited time term contract for 2 or 3 years, I forget.
Correct.
And that if no general fund money were to be identified, that system would then sunset at the end of that initial period.
Again, the system that I'm referring to that was controversial last night was not connected to the general fund. That general fund I alluded to was a different item on the wish list. So I'm not saying that the surveillance camera that's supposed to be citywide, that may or may not be different from the one that was city council approved, had any relationship to general fund. There's a different item on there that was identified as having a connection, not the citywide camera surveillance system.
Okay.
I just want to say, I don't really have a problem with the license plate reader, okay? I think it makes sense. I personally don't like cameras at intersections unless there is a hazard at that intersection. I avoid certain intersections in the city of Covina. I want to see a police officer pull me over. But where there is known hazards, like at a train crossing or something, it makes sense, because if an accident happens, the people sue the city and the train company and stuff, and that gives a record. But just to put cameras throughout the city, it would be a problem, I think, for a lot of us. But the license plate reader, that just kind of makes sense. I'd like to see more men and women in blue hired, though.
I want to talk or ask a question actually about, it was brought up earlier about a sewer. Actually, it was posted in the paper. It was basically saying they wanted to raise the sewer assessment for everybody to pay a higher fee, and referred to a $14 million thing. I've never seen anything that talked about this $14 million. And I know there was a study done about sewers many years ago in the city, but I don't know what the dollar figure is associated with that. I don't think it was $14 million. So I'm curious where that number came from. And I'm really bothered about this decision making by the city council without financial analysis attached. It was in the state audit. It's in our fiscal recovery plan that we won't do that, yet the city keeps doing it. There was a decision made to place this ad that we're going to have a hearing on increasing the sewer assessment to pay for fixing the sewers. That may be fine and okay, but there's no financial analysis. There's no project. No discussion. You don't make the decision first, then worry about the money later. That's what the state said to us, and yet it still keeps happening. And
Jim, if I could speak to the question of the sewers.
Yeah.
The city did a master plan of sewers several years ago and identified unfunded needs there for cleaning of the laterals, clearing the hot spots, a new lift station that was needed on Azusa Avenue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when they set this citywide sewer district, it contemplated that rather than just elevator up to what the cost should have been 4 or 5 years ago whenever the study was done, it would gradually increase it over the period of 5 years, I believe. So that's the hearing next Tuesday, is to set that in keeping with the increases that were contemplated by that master plan of sewers.
well, I guess what I'm trying to say, perhaps I'm not saying it very well, I'm not trying to argue the point that something needs to be done about the sewer system. That isn't my actual issue. My issue is that when something is on the council agenda for action that involves a decision, in this case, to spend the taxpayers' money to increase the assessment, which is what this is. It's a tax increase, even though it's called a fee. There should be a financial plan attached to that, a financial analysis attached to that decision. Every time there's a decision that spends money, there should be significant money. I'm not talking about little things. This is big money. There should be a financial analysis attached to it. That's what the state asked for. That's essentially what I'm trying to ask for. That's pretty much it. I have some other quibbles about the sewer fund because I made a speech almost exactly a year ago to the council. How come we're not spending any of this money now? That was last year, and as far as I know, we didn't spend it. We haven't spent any yet. We apparently budget $2 million every year, but we don't really spend it for fixing this problem. And there's no capital projects associated with sewer systems. I mean, they'd spend money on cleaning out stuck sewers and things like that. But I'm talking about it needs, as you rattled off some capital projects that are needed, and I don't know why we're not doing any of that stuff. According to this old report that I'm referring to that was done, that some of the systems are in danger of failure. And we should be at least trying to fix some of it now, not waiting year after year after year. That's an operational question, really, not a budget question.
I understand. And the answer to that is we are delivering capital projects out of the sewer fund to fix the sewer system. The most recent one being the sewer lift station on Azusa Avenue, just below Amar. That's in the current fiscal year. So there are capital projects being delivered out of the sewer fund as it should.
Okay. Well, when I looked, of course, my problem is I'm not getting any current financial reports. There were no expenditures this fiscal year. Now, perhaps in a later financial report, perhaps we can get financial reports, and maybe that will solve the problem, and I would know that project you just referred to actually happened. I know it was planned because I remember them talking about it, but I had no information on whether it really happened or not. So anyway, that's enough about sewers.
Anyone else?
I'm going to ask a question I think that Dave kind of started over there. He'd mentioned the sportsplex, and I know you didn't look like that was in the budget when the first slide. I think you were saying that in the health department weren't in this. Is the parks, playgrounds, and fields on the CIP capital improvement, is that any money being spent at sportsplex? So none of the CIP money is going to sportsplex. So that's going to be a complete budget amendment when it comes up. Okay.
Before you make it better, if I could make it worse, the sportsplex has some serious needs of capital repairs.
Well, I know.
Air conditioning, HVAC system that wasn't even maintained, and it's been in service for 13 years. Fire protection system, not functional, fire alarms and fire water delivery systems. Building maintenance has suffered, is quite sad. Fields maintenance, quite sad. The thing hasn't even been painted. So there's a lot of work that's going to have to be done. A lot of attention is going to have to be paid to the sportsplex.
Okay, so since you gave me all that making it worse before you make it better mentality, let me make it even worse.
Yeah, okay.
Where are we at in that process, if you don't mind me asking?
We're quantifying the cost of the repairs for all the things that need to be done there. HVAC, roofs, lighting, landscaping, buildings, sports field lighting. There's going to be quite a lot of data coming toward us on that facility.
My understanding is there's an RFP out right now for someone to operate the facility. Is that true?
Well, the RFP pertained to restaurant operation. So we issued an RFP and have had interest and are in conversation with some people that have responded to that.
Do you know if we're going
That's actually a revenue stream.
Well, it can be. Depends on how it's ran. Have we determined if we're going to maintain our alcoholic license on that facility, or is that going to have to be reapplied for, or is that going to go away?
The new operator that's proposed assumes that he'll get a liquor license as part of that operation.
Okay. Are we going to continue to allow youth to use it? I know you literally can't operate on any field that has liquor nearby, so that eliminates a lot of the youth sports. I know girls softball plays there occasionally or had. I know adult softball plays there. I used to play there myself. But I know that by having alcohol, even though it is a money revenue stream, or can be if it's managed right, also prevents West Covina residents, kids, little leagues, specifically little league. I don't know all the different youth sports, but it prevents them from playing there.
I take your point.
Yeah.
I have to finesse that.
So it's definitely something I'd like to see. I'm going to pass this off to JD and let him ask his question, and then maybe I'll ask another one.
So if the leagues can't play where there's alcohol, could they play if when they're playing there's no alcohol sold?
I don't know that answer for a fact through Little League's bylaws because we just never played where there's alcohol. But I would say it's definitely a question we should ask Little League International. But that's only the only youth sports group I know of personally that doesn't allow the children to play at a place where there's alcohol. Like I said, girls softball's played there, and there's a number of others that have played there. But like I said, just that one specifically. I know when we got into travel ball with my son, we played there under travel ball because it wasn't sanctioned by Little League, so it's a whole different scenario. But Little League specifically, it's always, I remember as a president with the youth sports, Little Leaguers would love to play on those replica fields because they're kind of cool, and they're young, and it would be kind of fun. But because of the alcohol, we were never able to. And we may do. It's not that huge of a deal, but I guess it really comes down to what the revenue stream is, if there is one, because if there's no money being made, then why do it? So that's my philosophy anyways. Of course, I have that philosophy on everything.
Reason I started off with the surveillance camera controversy last night is because I honestly returned tonight hoping that I'd see a little more consideration towards the need of police in the city. We have, since I've moved into West Covina, we've been talking about our police force just dwindling down to an insignificant number. And with the recent events of accidents that resulted in fatalities, I had 5-car pile up in front of my house, the burglaries, name it. Is there a focus being placed on some way to mitigate this problem of not having sufficient police? We seem to pale in terms of safety, health and safety, compared to the other cities surrounding us. Medora, Sousa, Baldwin Park. Their police force seems to be a lot stronger, and certainly when it comes to traffic enforcement, we seem to have absolutely no strength in that area. Why is it that this presentation doesn't seem to illustrate much in terms of police?
JD, I see a need. And I guess as your city manager, the question I would ask you is, would you prefer that we take the additional services you're requesting out of the operating side of the budget or out of reserves?
I'm going to answer that question this way. I think that the focus of enforcement needs, which is probably a policy question, needs to come from council as to how forceful the existing police force we have is willing or is instructed to go out and do the job. Now, ideally, I think, we can probably cut back where we need when it comes to police and fire, because those are two institutions that are vitally important to our existence. That's not a clean park. And I'm not trying to say that we don't want clean parks, we don't want street cleaning, but we've seen many of those things already go away, and we still do not have a strong police force. So your question kind of begs the answer, because neither of those options has really resolved the problem. And in fact, they've already been explored to a certain extent.
yesterday afternoon, we had a gang shooting in town. And bullets flew. Somebody got hit. And while that was going on, 2 schools had to be locked down. And the police department was dealing with 2 children, very young minor children, wandering the streets completely unsupervised. Did I need more police officers in that moment? Absolutely yes. But what I'm trying to do is present a budget which is in keeping with the city's ability to pay. So on one hand, you say you want more services. I agree. But getting there is the hard part because resources are limited.
I hear what you're saying, but what I'm seeing is you created a brand new department, kind of connected to the police department, and that is code enforcement. And I'm thinking, okay, well, why aren't we channeling the monies and the effort towards actual peace officers, or maybe structure that code enforcement in such a way that could be a complement to the police department in terms of giving out citations? I don't know what the limitations are, but I don't see the focus in that direction. I'm seeing the focus in a lot of the cosmetics of the city, which is very attractive to the residents, but they'll be of no use if we end up, dead because some crazy maniac breaks into our homes and kills us, God forbid. Or we get run over by homeless where we don't want to go to the parks any longer. So that seems to me to take priority over many of the itemized projects listed here.
JD, I think you kind of hit a little bit of that. And, the topic that I'm famous for lately, I guess, is the MOUs. Is there any work on getting those? I'm going to use the word changed because I think that's the easiest word. The MOUs that were passed that we can't afford in 2019, that took $3, $4, $5, $6 million out of our budget, and that would have been several officers we could have kept instead of paying the ones that are here currently. So I'm just curious, is there any work on getting that done to change that structure of those MOUs, maybe rescinding them or getting them to go away? Because the temporary part of that MOU of them giving back, that's expired, and so we're past, and so now we're back to full strength on what the MOUs were before.
Well, let me say this.
Yeah,
this city's employees are its best asset.
Totally agree.
We have a hardworking, dedicated workforce. We have to pay the price to be a full-service city. We have contracts. We have labor agreements with 9 unions, police, fire, and the 7 others. A contract is a serious thing. We're going to comply with state law, and we're at the table. But that's where those conversations need to occur. And during the term of a contract, neither party gets to just unilaterally change it. We went through a period during the pandemic with all of our unions who gave back. And they weren't required to do so, but they all did, save 1. But 8 of 9 did, and with the 9th we imposed. But I think we have to maintain good relations with our labor groups. And those issues, we talk about interest-based bargaining, that's where it belongs, at the table.
I think we agree on that, on probably all the approach that you just kind of said. I understand it's a legal thing. I understand it's an agreement. I understand all that. But, I mean, that's part of the issue is you asked JD here, do you want it to come out of capital, operating costs?
Operating or reserves.
Or reserves, right. So, we know we can't take it out of reserves because that's deficit spending, and I'm opposed to that. So I understand how, budgets work. Yeah, budget at my house too. Typically, my wife tells me what I can't spend, and I go against it. So I'm the deficit guy. But no, the honest answer though is those raises came out of operating, and I agree with you. Our assets are our employees. I think our best asset in the city is absolutely the staff that runs the city. There's no question. But in the same breath, the contracts that were approved by this council, put us more in a hole where we could be hiring more people. So JD's got a point. You're asking if it comes out of operational. Yeah, raises happen. I get that raises happen. And I think a lot of our employees have absolutely not been able to get some things, but some raises are too much.
We got a minute. I guess nobody's in a hurry, but let's talk about that. We've talked quite a bit about the need for additional law enforcement deployment. If the national standard is an officer per 1,000 population, we should be at 104. We're at 90. At the worst, during the last 2-year period, we were down to 78. And people were leaving. Fine officers were leaving. I mean, Christmas, I thought Ontario was the promised land for a while there. Somebody went over there, signaled back to his colleagues and coworkers, hey, the water's fine and they pay better. We had to do something. So the plan can't be, we'll never give anybody another raise ever because we're competing for labor in a labor market. We're going to have to balance this as we go. We can't just add more officers and ask everybody else that works here, 300 people working here, to never get a pay raise. We're going to have to be the adult in the room as we address these issues. In the fire department, we've got a building condition report about Fire Station 1 at the table. They were concerned about the conditions, as were we, management. We got a written report saying everything except move out immediately. Now we're getting bids for temporary crew quarters, and we're getting bids for roll-up doors on the former city shop building on an interim basis. Interim in this town could mean years. We're going to try and get good trailers, and we're probably going to have to demolish that building. And we're not out of the woods. We're dealing with these things every day in real time.
And again, I understand that, and I'm not saying that we don't give raises, because I do think there has to be something there. I think those were exorbitant. I think they were more than should have been. I know you say people were leaving, and I get that, but there's also a lot of people who are trying to get hired in that industry, and I think we could have easily done that. I don't like to see anyone leave, but attrition happens. People leave, people change jobs. That's part of the business. And if some of those felt that Ontario was the greener pasture, it's going to happen. And in law enforcement, with all due respect, and fire, there's a lot of people who change departments. They lateral all over the place. I've got friends that are in law enforcement, have been with 4 and 5 departments, and it's all based on what they think at the time. I've had friends that were at one city, left to go to another one, and lateraled back. Yep. Because the grass wasn't greener. It happens. It's happened here. I know officers here who've done that. But I still think, my personal opinion, and I think those others that are out there feel as though that those were a little bit over the top. And so you're looking at $6 million, $6 million in, as you put it, operating expenses that have now been going on that would pay for some additional officers out there, as JD's saying. You said we have 90 right now. I think, weren't we budgeted for 99 at some point? What are we at right now?
Budget for 90.
Budgeted for 90? I thought for sure 2 years ago we were budgeted for 99.
I think we're at 90 was where we were.
I'll have to go back and look, because I think we're going to disagree on that one. But like I said,
I'm happy to be proved wrong, but as I recall, the number's 90.
I love proving people wrong, so it's good.
There you go.
But like I said, from my perspective, I think that there's issues in where those operating costs have went. And if there's really some people that are willing to do some work, those MOUs were very poorly written and need to be addressed. And I understand it has to go to the table. I get that. I understand it's a negotiation. My question is, and I don't know that you can answer this, but are we making an effort to make those MOUs more palatable to the people? Because that was the whole purpose. And honestly, it's why Measure WC got voted down, in my opinion, because people were pissed about it. And with an 80% vote no on Measure WC that came right after those MOUs, that's a pretty unsettling percentage of people in the city who voted against Measure WC and probably against those MOUs. It says a lot, in my opinion, about where we sit as residents and who feels what. And it's a big vote. And I know you guys were looking forward to the extra tax money, but the reality is those MOUs are probably mostly what cost Measure WC. And I was against Measure WC from the start. You just gave us a sugar cookie when you guys voted those in, or the council voted those in. But like I said, from a standpoint of operating costs and what JD said, those are things that affect the number of officers on the street. And so I would like to see more work done in that area to try to increase it, because I do think there's room. That's just my opinion.
Okay.
And I don't think it was just that the 15% was a bit high as a raise, but I think, was it 12? I'm sorry. I don't know where I got 15. 12%, yes, 333. But the timing, right? And as well as the timing, that it went to fire and police. And again, I don't think we're really, aside from this pandemic, I don't think the fire department is overwhelmed with fires in this city, where we can say, well, you know what, it's well worth investing in. I'm not trying to demean them in any way, but what I realize is this isn't New York City. This isn't even Los Angeles. There are no high-risers here in West Covina. And fire is pretty much a medical provider, transportation-wise. Police, on the other hand, is an entirely different animal. We're talking about, and nowadays you have them, or not you per se, but the council and its wisdom has them working on projects such as the whole project. So that's one officer, that's one less that's used for street surveillance. He's assigned to the homeless project. Hope, isn't it the Hope? Isn't that what that's called? Hope. So again, my focus, my concern is the focus of the police, as well as why isn't money to be invested in creating a more stable, greater type of police force, and the 12% spread, to the fire department equally, I thought was just probably not the way to go about it. And you talk about there being an adult in the room. Once there has to be an adult in that negotiating room and know how to draw the line and say, you know what, we can't do this because eventually we're not only going to be able to give you a raise, we're not going to be able to employ you because this city's going to go belly up. I think those raises brought us one step closer to selling those bonds, to taking some of the measures that we have to try to keep the city running. As a resident, I don't think that probably was the best choice, but I'm not an expert. You folks are. So all I can say is looking at the optics, the raises to both departments, followed by selling bonds and trying to get an initiative through the voters that really wasn't, again, brought to the city to discuss, didn't go over very well based on the results of that vote. So why not have a little more focus on the police in terms of trying to beef it up some?
I suspect you get tired of the MOU, but it is still talked a lot about among residents. I think that all employees, the ones that didn't get a raise, deserved a raise. And I've said this to the finance director, I believe, and maybe to you. I think it wasn't giving a raise, it was the amount of raise and trying to bring everything up so quick. Virtually everyone in this room, well, I don't know, most of the people sitting here worked in the public sector or work with the public sector. We know we're not going to have A-plus stuff. We know that there's limits on budgets. For me, and I think many people, the fire department overtime has to get controlled. I don't think that can be said too many times. I think that it has to happen. We were told that when it was fully staffed fire department, the overtime would not be a problem. There's always going to be some. And they still deficited. Right. It doesn't seem to matter. For me, and I'm saying this more for the residents in here, we can't, and I'm not advocating undoing the 12%. It's that second part that kicks in. that I would like to, I am hoping is being discussed responsibly and at the table as part of interest bargaining.
Jerry, let me answer that question in this way. The management tool that is often used by cities to address the issue of total compensation is a classification compensation study.
Right.
We've issued an RFP for that. The purpose of that is to do an examination of how people are classified and how the city is organized.
Right.
And then you survey your comparable cities in this labor market with which we compete for talent
Right.
on a total comp basis, and then you set the pay ranges in keeping with that. And then the city can decide holistically and comprehensively where does it want its compensation to be among its labor market cities. What are those cities?
That's true.
And where do you want to be? Do you want to be the worst paid city in the labor market? Do you want to be the median? Do you want the salaries on the leading edge and the benefits on the trailing? Currently, we seem to have the opposite of that. So that report is recommended on next Tuesday's agenda to go out with a class comp study. I don't know how that's going to fare on a council agenda, but I think that's the way in which these issues are addressed, and as a community, they'd be decided.
What's frustrating to me, I agree with you. They did that where I work. That's not the issue.
This city hasn't done it in 20 years.
Well, where I had an issue with it was in the MOU, where in a collective bargaining, and I've debated this in social media with the fire union people a while back. We did those practices that were in, we just didn't put it in a collective bargaining agreement. We would agree, we would go back to the table, and I've seen other public safety contracts where they'd say, we're going to use cities A, B, C, D, E. Yep. But they didn't say what rank. They didn't go, I think West Covina went into too much detail in a collective bargaining agreement. That's my complaint.
It's not just the class comp study. I mean, I know you appreciate HR issues. This city has personnel rules that haven't been adopted, refreshed this century.
I worked in the same type of environment.
No,
My last project was
not a best
updating them.
practice.
Yeah.
And so at the table, we're negotiating about that as well.
Yeah. No, it is.
We've got a lot. We've made good gain. We've made good progress, but we've got a lot of big work ahead of us.
Because what should have happened, in my view, is all of the employees should have gotten a smaller raise. I mean, the ones that didn't get a raise should have gotten something, okay? And the fact that two groups got a big one and other people got nothing, that's demoralizing for everybody, including the residents.
I hear you, Jerry.
Thank you.
I've spoken a lot on this particular subject, but I'm going to give a short answer to your question that you asked. I think it was Steve, maybe JD, maybe both. In my mind, this is just Jim Grevich speaking, the resources allocated to the fire department are excessive, and the resources allocated to the police department need replenishment, increase, whatever word seems to fit. So I'm trying to answer that question directly, how I would deal with JD's request, which is to make the environment safer for the community. And the reason I say what I said about this is JD's absolutely right. If you talk to the residents in the city, what they need, they want to feel safe. And their issue that they're worried about is not that their house is going to burn down. Their issue is that a criminal's going to hurt them. That's their issue. So that's why I said what I said about moving money from fire to police, to directly answer your question. And my data, I'm a data-driven person, is that the city really doesn't have very many fires. In fact, one of our stations hardly has any. And I've said this before on several occasions. Why do we have this station? I don't know. When there's really no work for the men to do. And especially since there's 2 other stations that are close by. They do adequate, according to the standards, response time coverage. But, you know, in a lot of places, not just government, we keep doing things because that's the way we've always done them. Anyway, so that's a direct answer to that. I do have one new thing on this subject to say. I don't think you have heard this before, because I think the last time I made this little speech was when we had a previous city manager. But I spent a part of my life dealing with the horrible pension system that we have, which is the real cause of all these troubles. Because if the pensions weren't so expensive, the city would have enough money. It's pure and simple. And the pensions are so expensive because of the change that was made in 1999 to make retirement age way too young, and it was not sustainable. And it's still not sustainable. But I don't think politically that can be changed, at least not at the moment. It might be someday in the future. But I have a very specific suggestion on this subject. I looked at the HR website of the city, and it says the fire department is recruiting new firefighters, but they only want transfers, no new recruits. I said, why do we have a problem? Because we only hire the most expensive firefighters possible. And I just don't understand that. The police don't do that. The police will hire new recruits. Well, they do. Actually, one of them was in front of my house the other day. One of your brand new police officers got to sit in front of my house with his training officer. He was doing traffic. Anyway, I did a financial analysis of the cost of a transfer versus the cost of a new recruit. And the way the city has been doing its hiring, with only hiring transfers, essentially doubles the retirement costs. And let me try to explain how that works. If you hire somebody that's 35 years old, instead of somebody that's 22 or 23 years old, that person's going to retire in 10, 15 years. And you're going to have to pay almost all of his retirement, because the way the retirement system pays is if they're split between 2 agencies, it's based on money paid. Well, you make a lot more money at the end of your career than you do at the beginning, so the agency that employed the person at the end of their career pays almost 80-90% of their retirement costs. And the other agency got 10, 15 years essentially for free on retirement. And that's like $50,000 a year per man. It's a lot of money. And if you hire them early, and unfortunately they decide they want to work somewhere else, wonderful. You just saved that same $50,000. And what the city's been complaining about is a bad thing that they leave in the middle of their career is actually a good thing financially. They're much, much less expensive. They only work in the first half of the year. And your HR site is upside down. They should be doing no transfers. They should only be hiring recruits. And that way you would have enough money to hire. If of course you have to wait a few years for all this turnover to happen, but you could hire 5 or 6 police officers just with the money I just talked about.
I take your point, Jim. I also think this conversation is interesting in terms of what types of services does this city want. And we've talked quite a bit about fire tonight and quite a bit about police, which is where the money is. These are our 2 major departments. Is it your thinking to better manage the overtime that we would brown out a fire station as we go forward?
Well, I've talked about browning out, but only as this is a implementation strategy, not a final solution. I want to be very careful the way I talk about browning out in case everybody doesn't know what browning out means. Browning out means that if for whatever reason you have a station absent, you just simply don't refill the station on overtime. A station absent. Now, in fire station terms, that means a captain, an engineer, and a firefighter, 3 people. If they're all absent, they could be absent because the positions are vacant. They could be absent because there's that many people out on industrial, which I think was the case for quite a while. And you just simply don't fill it on overtime. You just leave it dead. In the county, they don't call it browning out. They use a different word. They call it dark. Fine, let's call it dark. Whatever. Because the county does this. And it's interesting, our firefighters wanted to go to the county, and it does all the practices that they say are awful. But anyway, that's a temporary thing. It's only while we have attrition and we're gradually accumulating enough vacancies so that we could essentially close Station 4. And why I say Station 4, that's the one that doesn't have any fires during the year. But that's the browning out would be a temporary phenomenon that would occur. Probably take, I don't know what your turnover is. The normal turnover is 3%. It probably take maybe 2 years for the full turnover to happen before the station could be closed. During that period, there'd be browning out. That's what I mean by browning out. I do not recommend or layoffs as a method of implementing this. And the reason why is I've had a lot of negative experience with that concept, mainly on the morale issues. You lose more than you gain. I mean, you gain some money, but you lose productive staff. So I don't think it's a good idea. But so that's why I use that term. But I tried to explain it in a long email to the staff. You've seen this in writing before, what I just said, but I don't think everybody else here had heard this. So and that's the means to implement what I said earlier about moving resources from fire to police.
I have a question about the restrictions that you said that the recovery fund had, because you listed quite a few. And I wondered, is there a restriction from using the funds instead of the reserve funds to balance the budget?
So by doing that, you would basically be replenishing any of your rainy day or reserve funds.
Is that
you can't
what it's
just
called?
put it back into our fund. We'd have to spend it on something. The government really federal government wants us to spend the money to kind of stimulate the economy as well. So we need to spend it on specific projects.
Because I didn't think you were replacing the reserves at all. So that's why I asked the question.
It's a good question, and I hope Stephanie answered it. I can tell you, having worked in local government my whole life, I've never seen the equal of this in terms of the sudden availability of federal money to do things. I was on the phone yesterday afternoon with our Congresswoman, Grace Napolitano. We had put in for a roadway project for Azusa Avenue, and she called to tell me we were getting it. And she's a very hardworking lady. I really appreciate her. But we are going after every avenue, source, program, pot of money for which the city is eligible for whatever they may lay in front of us, if it's infrastructure or if it's, who knows. I'm going to keep going after them, and so far our batting record has been pretty good. And I think they're making it much easier now for cities, for municipalities to help them spend our money. And I'm happy to help with that. We're going to keep doing it.
Just out of curiosity, you want to elaborate on what the Azusa thing is? Is it center dividers or what? you opened the door.
No, it's a infrastructure project. We're looking at signal synchronization and handicapped accessibility. We've got a lot of work there on sidewalks that needs to be done, curb ramps, and the idea that federal money could be available to do that and to do signal synchronization doesn't just need to be done in this jurisdiction, but the ones to the north and to the south as well. But this would be a major accomplishment in terms of capacity on that street if we could make it more efficient. Well, we're going to do maintenance districts, Jim.
I'm going to go back to public safety for a second, and I know it's the 80% of our budget or whatever it is, 90%, whatever the number that is. I'm going to let Jim have his brownout. I actually would like to see the tiered dispatching that he's brought up before. Do we have, That
would be more.
Right, I understand. Can this go towards that? Training and implementation of equipment and needs.
Well, we've got a lot of unfunded liabilities in that area, training and equipment and needs. So this plan includes $265,000 for EKGs. We would like to have one in every firehouse. We've got $1.2 million for the breathing apparatus, the SCBAs. We've got $3.3 million for communications equipment, radios for the police and for the fire. Can we find some other eligible use and qualify it? Maybe. If you've got a suggestion, I'm happy to look into it, because there does seem to be some latitude here. My focus has been just trying to get things to standard that are not now. Any objective look at the way we've been just holding it together with baling wire and duct tape, this is a chance to get things current and get us out of the realm of OSHA violations and things that are just not to standard. We hear about these things kind of piecemeal. I forget who comes to this microphone almost every meeting, reminds me of the bad condition of the bathrooms here at City Hall. Well, bless his heart, he's right. But that repair triggers plumbing from one floor to the next, triggers asbestos, triggers, if you get over a certain threshold, filing with the Department of Industrial Relations and prevailing wage. It's going to cost a whole lot more than just replacing a faucet. It's going to be a little project. It's going to have to get on the CIP to get done. But it's a daily struggle here to get things to an acceptable standard. It's a daily struggle.
So you bring up bringing things back to, no baling wire and duct tape, but if we're looking at trying to do that, wouldn't it be good to go from that spot instead of repair it and then replace it, kind of do the repair and replace in one shot?
Well, we are trying to, what we touch and do it once and do it right. We've got a notice to proceed now on our energy project, $3.3 million worth of solar panels to create money, to create revenue, $3.2 million worth of measures that'll save money, 7,500 light bulbs, new roofs, new cool roofs, new HVAC systems, and we're paying for it out of the energy savings that we create with a loan. Everything we touch, Steve, we're trying to do it right. We're looking at the park sports fields, the lights. We don't want to put up, last century's, metal halide or whatever it was. We're going LED. And we'd like to get I know you're a sports person, Musco lighting. So it's not just new light bulbs, but it's an operating system where we can save personnel costs by using this as the on-off button, and it can be dialed in very precisely in terms of when the sun sets, which the user group is, whether they've paid for lights or whether they haven't. So we can keep operating costs to an absolute minimum by getting the right technology in place. As we touch it, we're trying to get it from decrepit to modern. We're trying to move the city into a new horizon of getting things proper. If you look at the roof deck of the parking structure here, have you been up there? Ay, ay, ay. I mean, those metal stanchions are falling off. And with this project, we're going to pull them off and keep the metal stanchions and drench that thing with solar panels. We're going to put them on the roof of City Hall. We're going to put them in a lot of places. But everything we touch, we're trying to get it so we don't have to come back next week, next month, next year. We want to put in place something that's a known industry standard. When I look at these chambers and the condition of those chairs and this carpet that literally is being held together with duct tape under, maybe not your feet but mine, it's not right. We need to get things better. We can do better. We will do better.
So on the fire, back to that, do you know how much money we generate on the ambulance program?
Almost nothing.
So it's break even, kind of?
It's negligible.
Okay. So if we were to contract 100% of our ambulance service out to CARE, we could still bill the ambulance service, and then we just pay CARE what they charge us, correct?
Well, contracting is, I guess, a possibility. I think we should, in all services, look at alternatives in service provision. That would be a radical change from the system we now have. This city has longstanding ambulance transport rights, and if we were to go with a contract model, we'd have to be very careful that we keep those. We don't want to just give that up and get it drawn into the county system. We'd want to retain the right to do ambulance billing as part of that contract. It would be a major change under the county rules in terms of how you transport patients and what level of care do you provide as you transport them. It can't just be scoop and run with a Boy Scout troop. It has to be somebody that meets the standard for that. But there might be an opportunity there long term for the city to at least consider. There might be. So
when you talk about the standard, are you referring to the fact that LA County requires a paramedic to be on a ambulance while they're transporting?
Department of Health Services has a standard.
Okay, because I know other counties don't have that, and I know it's an LA County specific thing, right? So basically, you're saying that if that was to happen, they would have to have a paramedic
and
on the
other
ambulance.
cities have done this and have successfully implemented. It would be a changed way of doing business here. Sometimes, operational change comes at a price so high it's not acceptable. I have no intention ever of recommending we contract with the county sheriff. But if you look at per capita law enforcement costs, I'll tell you it's cheaper. I think you get far less service, but it's cheaper. So in every aspect of our operation, there's always ways to rethink and maybe recast it going forward. I think we have to be careful as we do so that we maintain good services.
I'll finish that by saying I also don't ever want to go to LA County Fire. I think you've hopefully gotten that message. I hope the 5 up there have gotten the message. Yeah. So on that long cast thing, I've got emails that say otherwise, but on that cast thing, I would say that doing the ambulance thing I could be in favor of. It does offer the ability for, as Jim was saying, a reduction in staff in a kind of an attrition way, as I'm saying you were probably looking at as attrition. But it's just an opportunity for revenue possibilities. And I know that we've tested CARE already, and I support that idea. I'm just looking at it from a standpoint of if we can go to CARE or another ambulance service, AMR, whoever it is that's available, and put a paramedic and an EMT on there, and we do tiered dispatching, we may not have to send a fire engine to every medical call.
Well, take the last one first. Tiered dispatching comes at an additional cost. We don't. You're talking about adding things, guys. You're going in the wrong direction here. But it's possible that the city could look at standards of coverage. I think a full-fledged SOC would probably be north of $100,000. And I don't think you can just get into this on a ready, fire, aim basis. I think you have to be very deliberate about what standard of care you're meeting and how. I'm not sure we're ready to even open that conversation, but I think that would be the way to do it if it were to be done.
Okay. Well, like I said, my concern was the pace we were going to go to LA County and how that slowed down. That's good, but like I said, I could do I could at least temporarily look at the idea of doing care and going away from our ambulance. I think that's possibly a way. And you're right, it is possibly adding stuff, but I also think that we could be reducing stuff where, as you put it, the difference is negligible. And so I'm looking at it from that perspective of it could increase service or even provide a better control on our expenses, because now we have different retirement situations.
I can tell you, having been your city manager now for a couple years more, this town wants good service.
No question.
This town expects good service. I've never had a resident call and say, hey, I've seen some graffiti. When you can get around to it, would you please? It's, I want it out yesterday. It's, my tree needs trimmed. It's, there's a pothole, and the bathroom is dirty at the park, and I want it sparkling clean immediately. Forget it was sparkling clean this morning. Somebody graffitied it, and I want it done. This town has high expectations for service, high expectations.
But as I say, I was just going to say, the reason for that is, unfortunately, prior to the current council and even the last one, that's the example that those councils set. Is, you know, our streets, when they did the pavement study back in you know, 8-10 years ago now, or whatever it was, we were in the high 70s and 80s for our streets. We're probably not in the PMI anywhere around that. 69 now. Yeah, so we're at 69 now. So it's deteriorated because, unfortunately, the councils that made those priorities and made some of those things priorities, maybe at a cost for dilapidating some other stuff. That's obviously open for debate, but they made those things priorities. So residents, it's not that they're expecting something better than what they've got. They're noticing that what's happening is less than what they are used to. And so, you know, that's a direct reflection, no offense, that's a direct reflection on policies and procedures and what's being approved by various councils. And I'm not blaming the 5 that are here now. It takes time for this to happen, and there are councils that definitely have attributed to those decisions, not just the 5 that are up here, and 2 of them are not even up here 6 months. So, you know, like I said, there's a lot of things that what you're saying is you're absolutely right. As a resident, I do expect that. You know, on a graffiti contract, we had a guy that was a resident of the city who probably covered more graffiti before people got up in the morning than what he got calls for. And he was really, really good at it, and, you know, worked through a contract, you know, company, and he was the employee, but he did a really, really good job. And during that period of time, the amount of graffiti complaints, in my opinion, probably were nowhere what they are now, because we had a quality graffiti abatement program. And unfortunately, when the council that got rid of him, or got rid of the contract that he was working for, we've had now a consistent decline of graffiti. So when you say, you know, they want it done right away, it's not because we expect something that is new. We're expecting it to be something that we're used to.
Say the residents want it done correctly, so do I.
I don't disagree with you. I can't think of any city manager that wouldn't. So, I mean, I agree that you probably do. I'm just giving you the reason why residents feel that way. And so when residents don't get that answer, yeah, it absolutely feels like that the city's not listening. Now, again, I'm not blaming any one person here that's on this council or even the one before it. There's plenty of people that can line up and take some blame on this, you know, go all the way down. But, you know, you'd mentioned graffiti, so I just to say, you know, that's a perfect example. It's back on the hot button right now at the council. There was some things on the recent meeting, and part of the issues go back to the fact that one contract that was terminated, and it's been a number of years now, there's been a steady decline from that ever since. And that one contract, they made the decision of, it's going to cost less, we're going to do it. Well, here's the what we sow, basically. And so those are the things that I don't want to see happen. I'm looking for ways to, as you put it, find it in the operating costs, because I can't find it in the reserves, because that's not the way I do business. But I'm looking for ways to fix that. And I continue to see bad decisions being made, not staff specifically, because a lot of it you have to get approved by councils, but a lot of the people that are up there have, over the years, made some, in my opinion, bad decisions. And that has caused a lot of the things that now you're trying to repair. And unfortunately, money's not getting easier to get, but in the same breath, we've got to spend what we have smart. And I think you agree with that statement, the logic of it, but it's just a matter of finding out where it is. And, you know, people have brought up some things. So I'm going to stop. I think I've been on my soapbox long enough, but, you know, I'll give it off to somebody else.
You mentioned we want to increase. We want certain service. Steve is right. We're used to certain standards, and it is really difficult to see certain things just deteriorate. I'm going to give you an example of something that just really frosted me. Prior to you coming here, the council, the then council and staff spent a lot of time with the false alarms charge things. Nice presentation, that whole thing. Went through quite a few meetings. I remember saying a few things. They kept working on certain things and they adopted it. That generated some revenue. I actually was very disappointed to see it, and as a resident, I saw coming to the council, no real good reason to have canceled it. Was the rollout perfect? No, they never are. I know. The little postcard here, the Discover and stuff like that. But I actually do think that was a program that should not have been canceled. It should have been, if there was a problem with it, it should have been adjusted and continued, because it is expensive to have public safety respond to a false alarm.
I've got it written down. Let's summarize what Dave heard tonight. Is that useful?
Sounds good.
False alarms is at the top of the list because I ran out of space. Oh, Jim's going to make my list longer. Okay.
I've been hearing at the city council meeting, not from myself, but people get up and say, and the streets are going down maintenance-wise. And there's an oddity that I've mentioned once before last year. We don't spend anywhere close to the money that's in the gas tax fund. Every year there's at least $4 or $5 million left over. And I don't understand that phenomenon.
Yeah. The city went through 1 or 2 years when it did deliver no capital street projects at all. But we're getting them out the door now. We've got a construction contract in the center part of town where we've done the cold planing, and Gentry Brothers is going to do the paving literally next week near Wood Bridge Park, that neighborhood. On the tails of that, we've got the next pavement project, CIP project, coming in August this summer. So we're increasing the pace and the delivery. We've done 2 and are underway with a 3rd, and come August we'll be underway with our 4th. So I think we're doing much better in terms of delivering gas tax funded, Measure R, Measure M funded street paving projects.
You know, coming from a common resident here in West Covina, I hear you say that the rug underneath you is a problem, but I hear you say that the bathroom outside, because it escalates to other issues, doesn't take priority. And I think...
No, you're not hearing me. That's not true.
Well,
I never said that. Let me respond.
Okay.
In response to the citizen concern, I've been getting bids for that, and it proved to be, no surprise to anybody here, more expensive than I initially thought. And so we are actively seeking out bids to get it to standard. It's
and
not right.
I'm sure you are.
It's unacceptable. It's a mess.
But it's been a mess for quite some time. And in the meantime, and I hate to harken back to it, but we've seen decisions made by city council and yourself to spend money in other ways that haven't made priority. The raises and the overtime, continuous ongoing overtime usage. I recall a couple of years back where the fire department came in here and requested special funding on customized fire masks. They were like $70,000 each. And the ironic thing is that they admitted that once this individual that the mask is formed for, once they leave, they retire, the mask is no longer going to be used. So I was thinking, well, why are we investing in that? So it's a matter of priority. I mean, honestly, the rug underneath you, to me, doesn't supersede the bathroom outside. And I'm not saying you do, but you use it as an example. But the fact is that priorities set by this council and yourself have been problematic for this resident in terms of why are you doing X when Y needs the attention? I find that to be rather contradictory, and it always kind of hits me on the face why you're approving or why you're going forward with such actions. Certainly, you promised you'd find the money for the raises. We didn't see that come through until bonds were sold and what have you. But that's the kind of prioritizing from the city that I get offended by.
Well, the list I heard tonight, starting with the last one first, we want to revisit the false alarm program. We want to examine the revenue projections, especially the property taxes. We want to look more closely at curtailing fire department expenditures, overtime, the possibility of browning or blacking out. We want to show, as regards the revenue estimates, estimates to actual, so we can get some sense of whether those property tax and other general fund revenues are understated or over. I think they're right on, but I guess we need to look at the data. We want to evidence some long-range planning in terms of the 5-year horizon. We want to look at netting. You got that one? Did I miss anything?
No, but I have another question when you're done.
Okay, go.
This will be a fast one. So we were talking about roads and everything else, and you mentioned, Measure M and all those different things, transportation funds. Where are we at with Prop A and Prop C funds? I know a lot of times the city sells Prop A funds for general fund dollars, as a lot of municipalities do. Where are we at with those? Are we selling more of those to try to pay for the budget deficit? What's kind of the plan? Because those have specific uses as well.
It's a budgeted transaction in the coming year. We're contemplating doing that.
Do we have any idea on how much we have right now in those funds?
I'm going to put Stephanie on the bright spotlight. I don't recall. But one of the concerns, I remember a conversation with Robin. She really knows when to take a vacation, doesn't she? Good for her.
I asked her
she
early.
was a little concerned that it might be off because it was driven by sales tax. And sales tax might be off a little, but I know we've historically done it, and we're planning to do it in the coming year.
Do you know roughly what we're looking at selling if we sell? And what the price is? Just curious.
I don't recall. Stephanie, do you happen to remember?
I do not remember off the top of my head. I'm trying to see what.
Oh, yeah, that one.
That's fine.
Budgeted.
I'm sure it'll come through council too because they got to approve it. But and so we don't know what the numbers are and if there's any projects out of those
we know
specifically.
to the extent it's in the budget. I just don't recall it this evening, but I'll get it for you.
Gotcha. Thank you.
1.8 million was what we did. We received 1.8 million in Prop A funds with another agency, resulting in 1.35 million in revenue for the general fund, and that was. Yeah, that's our goal for this next fiscal year, to coordinate the exchange of 1.8.
70 cents on the dollar.
So are you giving up on the idea of bringing the police department to the ideal number? Because it's not on your list. And I still I think that is, well, I don't want you just to put it on the list as a token gesture on my, I honestly would like for you to wrestle with the idea of bringing the police force back to what it once was, because crime has not gone down, it's gone up. Yeah, okay, right. I'm not looking for the exaggerated number, but we have historically heard that the police is working on with a skeletal crew, and that's unfair to the residents of West Covina. I personally, and I've had neighbors say that they've called, and the response from police is they're on an emergency call. We've heard people come up and testify to individuals actually being in their homes and being told that. Fortunately, in that one case, the person was caught, but that's unacceptable for a city as ours, and police has been made political football for too long, and it's time that you, city manager, and we appreciate what you have done in many ways, and other things we're not so appreciative of, but we certainly would appreciate that a focus, if whatever influence you have with city council, that you speak up in terms of bringing our police force to a standard that's acceptable for a size of this city.
Not a budget topic, but one of the things that we kind of joked about before this started, you and I kind of had a brief conversation kind of about the format and how it's kind of an open format, and we kind of like that, right?
I like it.
Outside of the budget, take that off the table. Can we have these more often, quarterly? We used to have councils that did town halls, and whether the council members here are not here or whatever we want to do that way, that has been gone now for several years. And I know people can come to council, and I know they can talk, but as I said at the last meeting, this council doesn't listen to us anyways. But maybe we can actually sit down as a town hall and present ideas rather than just 3 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever.
I'm open to the idea. I guess I'm offering personally. You want to have a city manager discussion council, or
I'm just looking at something resident-involved town hall.
I wanted to be here tonight. I wanted us to do this, and I think a lot of good comes of it. It's an honest conversations, and I appreciate it. So.
And I agree with you. I think the two-way conversation like we're able to have here is way different than a kind of a one-way conversation you get at a council meeting. And I understand there's parliamentary rules with that, so that's the way it has to be. But I know previous councils have done these, and I know a lot of things were learned both by city management, as before your time, by staff, by council members who attended just ad hoc, not as a noticed meeting. But there was a lot of things that came out of those that residents were able to voice and have a two-way communication, ask questions, get answers in most cases. And again, I know it's not budget related, but you and I both kind of joked about this is a good thing, and I think that we should have that more often. I don't have any visions of grandeur with the council listening, but at least we can get our ideas out there, and maybe something will spike.
I think they do listen. I know we take careful notes, and
I know you do.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Anything at all? We've moved off the budget. I don't care.
I want to say it a little bit different way. I've had occasion to talk to council people individually, and at least I feel that that's more effective, more productive than the formal thing that goes on in the council chambers. And the idea of a town hall with all of them seems to be moving in that direction. I'm just talking about practical effectiveness as a device, that's all.
It's probably true in the organization at every level vertically. I know that we had before the pandemic, the coffee with the chief. I thought that was great. People came and got to just chat and visit and introduce themselves. I thought it was terrific. So maybe we could try and do more. Yeah. Okay.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak?
I know. I just want to follow up on what JD said about the police. They should be a priority, especially when we're getting shootings in our city that we're not used to having.
Yesterday afternoon.
Right, you said that. And then there's been other ones. And the release of people out of the jails for whatever reason, all of that. I think the police really are our priority.
Can I just piggyback off of that? There we go. All right. You know what? This... No, I don't want the last words. But this graduation at West Covina High School, and I intended to go to the to their board because I sat on our porch. It was a wonderful event, but I sat on our porch, and those kids that were outside of the gate on the Cameron Street sidewalk were blowing off fireworks just as high as the ones that were being let go inside the stadium. We did not see not one police car drive by during the graduation. But what we did see, in addition to those fireworks, those illegal fireworks that you just increased the fine on, was people that were racing to show off, I guess, for the crowd. And this is reckless driving. So when I was talking about earlier enforcement and more police, it is exactly that this police department, for whatever reason, unknown to me, doesn't make those kind of stops. And we see them daily, almost on the hour, where individuals are racing around schools and parks. And in other states, I know Florida, that would be considered reckless driving and the cars would be impounded. In this city, it wouldn't dare think about doing that. I often hear the excuse, we don't have the manpower, we don't have the logistics to do it. But those are excuses, because the illegal fireworks, the racing of cars, the shootings, these are really existential threats to the residents, and that needs to be made priority. Not just increasing the number of police, but instructing the police to enforce the existing laws harshly and consistently, so that these individuals that are violating it with impunity receive a message, a serious message.
Yeah.
When's the last time this city impounded a car for reckless driving? I would be interested in knowing the number of citations this city issues compared to the surrounding cities. You've done a study on pay scales.
Well, JD,
it'd be interesting to see how many tickets are given.
To answer a couple of them. I know the criminal justice system is on its ear right now. Well, this year, first 5 months of the year, the city did 154 misdemeanors, and none of them were filed by the DA. 154, January to May. At that school event, I know we had police officers on scene. I drove by and saw them there. There were 3 or 4 uniformed officers on the field. So who was shooting off fireworks, when they came, when they left, I don't know, but I know we were there. I also know we're bringing back the SRO program with the recovery from the pandemic. We've signed agreements with, I think, Covina Valley and West Covina Unified. We're in communication with Dr. Mitchell from Roland. So we're gonna keep a strong presence on the campuses. And I hear you about wanting more citations. I hear you.
All right. Anyone else?
Thank you, everybody, for coming again. I appreciate it. I really do.